Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back. I'm Wayne Tuttle. I'm once again your host for this week's Chasing Legends. Please, before we get started, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell down below, go to the About section, t-shirts, black, gray, long sleeve, short sleeve, Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, Legends Superstition Mountains, also additionally baseball caps, black and gray embroidered and silk screened, and the coffee cups for both Dutch Hunter Rendezvous and Legends Superstition Mountains. We do it just so if you want to kind of have something. It's great to see all those people that have bought that stuff and bringing it out now at the rendezvous. So it's very cool. Moving forward, this week our audio is a little different. It's kind of odd because when we were at the rendezvous, our microphones wouldn't connect, our wireless handheld mics. So we ended up having to use a lav mic. We used the lav mic. It worked well all night, and it worked when we returned to do Chasing Legends on Monday. And tonight we went to hook it up, thought, oh, the battery's dead, replace the battery. Lav mic's dead. So the curse of the rendezvous. So I have new wireless, but we're not going to use those. We'll get the new lavs ordered up and everything. We'll be back in business. But today we'll use the Rode mic off of the camera. So the audio might not be as great as it normally is, but it should be fine. Should be pretty good. That being said, let's get into this week's topic. And it's one I've hit upon, I've talked about, and I've kind of hit the peripheral about. And we'll talk a little about it because it kind of connected with the rendezvous, number of people out. And this rendezvous was a little different sided with this and some of what I'll be speaking of. Generally anymore, you run into a couple there's different types of treasure hunters, let's say. You have your stone map guys, and they're kind of more of a much more smaller clique. They will get in groups of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 at times. They build teams, and we'll go into that in a minute. And then you have your Dutch hunters. Dutch hunters generally, they will associate with one another, but generally they're more solitary, or 2 guys, maybe 3, but you don't see a Dutch hunting team of 5, 6, 7 guys. Dutch hunting generally is based off this, the Jim Bark notes, or the other side is the Holmes manuscript. Now, it's not everybody just adheres to these two things, but the Bark notes is generally the Julia Thomas Rhinehart Petrasch story. Jim Bark wrote that, and he passed away in 1938. This is probably, he finished compiling and putting this together probably sometime in the late 1920s, early 1930s. It was used as a source as well for Simsey's Lost Dutchman Mine. Holmes manuscript, it was written by Brownie Holmes. It has a kind of another strange history because there was a ghostwriter that worked on it with him. Then it was put into the Arizona State University Library, and Brownie Holmes actually said he didn't write it, but it turns out he did. His family members remember him working on it. We don't know why. I have my reasons to understand. I will always recommend the Holmes manuscript, which this was published by Thomas Glover. And it's an excellent book because if you get by the Dick Holmes stuff, it's about Brownie Holmes' time in the mountains, some of the time he spent with his dad searching, but then more of his life in the mountains and some great short stories. So I always will recommend it because even if you're not a Holmes guy, it kind of gives you a little background on Brownie Holmes as well. The Bark notes are awesome because they cover so many different stories in the superstitions. You're going to get the 2 soldiers, you're going to get bits and pieces of Adolph Ruth, you're going to get Silver Lock and Balm, all these other stories additionally with a lot of other stuff. So they're both essential pieces of sources. One gives you more of a biographical understanding of an individual who was a 2nd generation Dutch hunter, and the other one is one of the first Dutch hunters out there in the field who spent roughly from his time on the ranch till 1928 when he pretty much was done and left. You're talking about, I don't know, 30 some odd years he spent off and on in the mountains and so forth. Now I was talking, we got these different kinds of groups. and you have the Thomas Petrasch group, which is really just the Rhinehart Petrasch. Rhinehart's the one that went to Jim Bark and said, hey, I don't think this is going to work. We don't know what we're doing. Here, I'm going to tell you everything I know. Then Jim Bark went to Julia Thomas. So we always refer to it as the Thomas Petrasch, but it's generally, it began with Rhinehart Petrasch. And additionally, then information from Julia Thomas. And though it's not a lot of it's included, there was a lot of material and information from their Dutch hunts later of Herman Petrasch and Godfrey Petrasch. So it's kind of the Thomas Petrasch Thomas version. And then you have the Dick Holmes version. And most people who've ever watched this know I kind of lean one way severely. The Holmes guys are generally, their usual attitude is to try to discredit the other side. Even Brownie Holmes does it in his book. That always seemed to be the aim of the Holmes group. Rhinehart's a drunk, Julia's crazy, and it's always like that. Where on the Holmes side, most of the Thomas Petrasch guys, Rhinehart Petrasch himself said, if Dick Holmes ever met Waltz, it was in the afterlife, and laughed. So they didn't seem to take the other side very serious. But that doesn't amount to a hill of beans, because regardless, when people believe in something, they believe in something. Now, Dick Holmes, always it's acted like, until Brownie told his version of the story, nobody talked. There's a book called Arizona Cowboy, and at the end of it, they have a big, long version of the Dick Holmes story. That book's published right after around 1900, 1902. The Dick Holmes story was known in public. Julia Thomas's story was, there were some newspaper articles, and it was kind of hit and miss what they were getting at. But even with Julia supposedly telling everybody and selling maps and all this, the Julia Thomas story was actually much quieter. The Dick Holmes story is actually the one that's more out in the public, kind of the fable. Dick Holmes would be in newspaper articles talking about this is what really happened. Of course, Julia's gone, or either Julia passed away, and Rhinehart's out of town. Herman and Godfrey aren't in there, and so he just had free reign to say whatever he wanted. Once Dick Holmes died, then Ida Holmes took up the torch, and Ida Holmes had her own version, and it was slightly different than Dick. Now, Dick's changed a number of times, which makes us curious why his changed. And then Ida Holmes has her variation on the story, which there's no Gideon Roberts. It's not Dick Holmes by himself. There's no Rodriguez. There's none of these other people. Ida was with Dick Holmes when they sat with Waltz. This is Dick Holmes' wife. Then Brownie changes it later to Gideon Roberts. So the Gideon Roberts version of the story kind of comes down the lane after all these other... And it makes no sense, because if that was the story to begin with, Gideon's dead, it doesn't matter. If it's Ida, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter who's there, because everybody eventually is gone. But it's odd that they kept changing particulars. Milton Rose has a different version entirely. So, again, as we go through this, it's just different groups. And that's one of my problems with the Holmes story, is it seems to be a variables based on the Thomas Petrasch story, but it wants to always put things in a different place. And it's not to take anything away from Brownie. He believed his father, he believed in his father and all that. But you have your Holmes and the Thomas Petrasch believers. These guys are more feet on the ground on both sides. They will find particular areas in the mountains. They will attribute certain areas of the mountains to things, sometimes whether they happen there or not. But those are your core Dutch hunters. And they're not necessarily treasure hunters. A lot of times they're guys looking for the Lost Dutchman. As they move along, they learn something to the kin about prospecting, about the vegetation, about the geology of the area, a number of different things. They're very different, and you will find, oh, so-and-so had a camp here. He had a couple guys working when they were searching for the mine or this or that. But they're generally smaller groups, and if not small groups, of loners. Now, your stone map guys who are out there, those are the guys we generally see. They solve this puzzle. It's the Lost Dutchman Mine, the Peralta stone maps, and they get all this. There's usually 4, 5, 6, 7. They have a very military-esque attitude about it. They'll be wearing the sometimes like bulletproof vests or flak vests and stuff. They'll have, semi-automatic rifles with them. They kind of go in. They're the guys with the Google Maps. I don't see a lot of Dutch hunters, per se Dutch hunters, with Google Maps. Usually once the Google Maps and a lot of that stuff starts coming into play, I expect and usually am not disappointed that the stone maps come into play. Again, Doesn't matter if Travis Tomlinson made them or not. It's kind of like the Holmes manuscript. If you found a letter that Dick Holmes said, well, I kind of learned some of this stuff and I made it all up and blah, 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 it wouldn't really matter because there's core guys, they're just going to believe it regardless. So you can't deter them, and you figure if they're not really hunting anywhere, well, who cares? The problems are sometimes is that there's been a bit of feuds. Things got traditionally in the day, people had kind of attitudes about these things. Now, Gus Barkley, who's known as Tex Barkley, was very good friends. He bought the ranch from Jim Bark. He worked with Jim Bark and Sim Zealy. He basically wrote back and forth with them and a number of other people. He was friends. He actually worked with Godfrey Petrasch and Herman Petrasch. So it's kind of curious because he hired Brownie Holmes. But I think his business was the cattle business, and while he may have kept his eye open for the mine and worked with the different people, I don't think that was his focus. Now, he probably had quite a collection of material at one point in time, and who knows what happened to that. It could be within the family. I kind of doubt he was too focused on that. I think he was more focused on cattle. But he was friends with all these guys and supported him. He could have felt sorry for Brownie Holmes. Who knows? Now, Brownie had a lot of different jobs. He worked as a livery driver at one time. He worked for Game and Fish. He worked as a cowhand, which could be seasonal. Tom Collenborn even did the same. And so you don't know his focus. We think of him as one of the hardest hardcore Dutch hunters. But by the time most people got to know him, it was much later in his years. So his early Dutch hunting days, which came and went, we don't know anything of. Now, Brownie Holmes, I know from a couple people that knew him, regretted not really ever trying to work something out or sit with Herman Petrasch. I think they met briefly once, maybe. I know Clay Wurst had met Herman. Tom Collenborn's dad knew him very well. They had partnered, and Tom knew him. One of the problems is that Herman and Rhinehart seemed to be completely indifferent to all this. They seemed to know their source, their material, and kept that very close to the vest, which is also, while Herman did a couple interviews, and he's usually the contributor to something like Barry Storm's Thunder God's Gold or Sim Zealy's Lost Dutchman. Other than the bark notes, Rhinehart contributes very little. There's a very hard to find book by a man named Ralph Pabst, and it appears that Rhinehart, he knew Rhinehart in Globe, but very little of the materials from Rhinehart. Most of it was embellished and changed later and given to him by Herman. So he struck up a friendship with Rhinehart, but Rhinehart died before he was able to really put together the book. So therefore, most of the book material that I got and notes I saw, that seems to derive more from Herman. But what we're talking here is this division, because it's very real. Now, the one thing you can get all the Thomas and Petrasch and Holmes guys together on is you bring the Stone Map guys in the room. You bring them in, and then the eyes roll. Now, you have to fundamentally remember, like I said, you have the Stone Map guys, and they will get together. They will find the matching T-shirts and hats. They will get together the gear. They will get like a kind of military, and they'll zone this and graph this. They'll bring in the Google Maps. They'll bring a laptop to the field. They'll do all this stuff. They'll talk about the Latin Heart. They'll give you 1,001 drawings and overlays and this and that and everything else. And the Dutch hunters will just look at them, kind of, So what's that mean? And they seem very disinterested over time. There are researchers and archivists that will always try to find out what they're talking about, how they pulled their material together, but it's almost a completely different breed. Now, they try to make that about Jacob Walls of the Lost Dutchman Mine, or about the Peraltas, or about the Jesuits, or whoever else, but that problem always stands is they're kind of like each one of them is individually in a different place with a different backstory, with a different reasoning and whatever. So again, I could give you all the evidence in the world, say in the archives, there's everything that shows, and even the videos of the family talking about Travis Tomlinson making the stone maps. They will have none of it, and that's fine. If that's what they fully want to believe, and believe there's a conspiracy theory on a conspiracy theory, that's fine. The Dutch hunters are fine with that. Because they don't understand is the Dutch hunters are more solitary. Dutch hunters are not going to get together. They'll look at their Google Earth stuff. They'll look at stuff. They go, whatever they do. Dutch hunters will share information, but they'll share information on areas other people are looking in. They will coordinate a little, but they're not necessarily. The last 20 years it's gotten much better, but Dutch hunters can be very private. Now, within the Dutch hunter circle, We all get along though. Everybody's got everybody's backs. So the worst thing you can do is go into some area and cause problems for some Dutch hunter, because everybody will be like, nah, he's a good guy, man. We respect each other's area. We'll respect each other's right to do things. They can be completely off the cuff, believe that space aliens came out of the ground and brought the gold and whatever into them. And we'll still kind of defer and say, but he's a Dutch hunter, okay? Kind of a likable good old boy. So, and we'll help each other out where we can. The difference is, where you get to it, is the stone map guys are into the conspiracies and this and that. And they got, and it sounds great. It's like a TV movie, you know? Each one of them has their own version of it. Dutch hunters know where all you guys are. You guys will go out with your fiber optics and your night vision and your this and that and everything else and map and take stuff out of books. The Dutch hunters' research is just piled onto you. If you want to see research, find a good old Dutch hunter. They will know stuff that will just boggle your mind, okay? The depth of it and everything. Because they look at the bark notes, they take it apart, they find the diets, they find the places, they go to each place. They narrow things down. They're completely meticulous. They understand the geology, prospecting skills, different. It's a completely different breed, and it's very independent. So you're walking through with your AR-15s through the canyon and thinking, yeah, we'll take care of anybody, we'll take care. The Dutch hunter's sitting up there with a 30-30 just watching you pass through, smoking a cigarette and going, man, I wonder what they're up to. And they'll get curious and maybe kind of keep an eye out for you or whatnot. Dutch hunter's the kind of guy that just walk through your camp, just take inventory of things and see how well you're sleeping while you're sleeping, okay? And that's kind of that difference. So when you see the guys piled together, it's like, you know, Crazy Jake. He's not maybe necessarily a stone map guy, but he's not. He was a con man, not a Dutch hunter. If he was a real Dutch hunter, he would not have had those crews and the amount of people and all that. A serious Dutch hunter is going to be very narrowed down. They're going to be loners. They will spend time in the mountains. They're not afraid to be in the mountains. They're certainly not afraid of anybody else in the mountains. They will come in and out. People will help them. And it's a close-knit group for as independently minded as it is. So it's always careful to address that stuff, because you have the Holmes and the Petrasch side of things, and I know there's still guys that are serious Dick Holmes guys. There's fewer and fewer. I didn't even hear of this stuff till probably sometime in the late 70s. It cropped up. That's how buried it was. Because what I thought at first, it was like, ooh, this is a hidden gem. And then what I found out is it was just generally most of the Dutch hunters didn't think much of it. They couldn't find anything to hang a hat on. They would look at it. There was just way too many cracks, way too many problems. And the Dick Holmes guys seemed to be Peter Mace's guys. They were up in, you know, Squaw and this place and around Crazy Jake, but they seemed to be in generally the same areas all the time, which was confusing, I think, to most other Dutch hunters, the Petrasch Thomas guys, because we're thinking, okay, you guys are on top of each other and you keep hitting the same piece of ground. How long before you figure out there's nothing there? But I'm not here to make fun of them, because, again, they're kind of like your brothers in the same family. Well, they could be half brothers, put it that way. They're halfway there, maybe. And they could view the Petrasch's Thomas groups as half brothers, because we're all kind of in the same place looking for the same thing along the same general lines. But you get to the stone map and the other treasure hunters, and it opens up a whole thing. Everybody knows who you are. If you come into the rendezvous and you think you're sneaking through and you're trying to be a Dutch hunter, everybody paid attention to you. Someone or many people got your photograph. People try to figure out and pinpoint who you are. If they don't think you gave their straight name, we ask questions, and if you've talked to us, you'll notice those questions go kind of incremental, and even if you trail off or say you got to be going and don't want to say anything, we're noting. We're making notes, and those notes will get compared. Not because we're a collective like the NSA, just because people will say, do you know who that was? Do you know who this is? Send a picture. You know who this guy is. And everybody notes, because everybody's keeping track of who people are. You have to remember, Dutch hunters worry about the Forestry Service and other groups that could be coming in, much less people who shouldn't be out there, have no business messing around out there. So they will look through and know who people are, the family lineages. They will look them up, keep track of them, and when they see them in the mountains. The best thing you can do is just generally come up and say, hey, my family's been into this stuff. I got into this stuff. This is what it is, and I don't want to give a lot out. But you can be upfront and honest, and they'll generally think, okay, kind of one of us, and you'll sit kind of on the outside of the circle, but they'll be kind of cool and realize, okay, all good. What area of the mountains are you thinking about? I don't know. And you can be vague, but you're being no more vague than they are. But the worst thing you can do is the more secretive you think you're being, I think the more you get outed. Because everybody's aware of it, and everybody starts asking each other. So quietly, not around that campfire, not around there, but everywhere else, that word's getting passed around. And you know who that guy is. You know who that guy is. When Frank Augustine showed up, everybody was like, who's the FBI guy? Because everybody was trying to figure out, was he a cop? Was he there investigating something? Was somebody in trouble? Was he doing something? The same thing for an attorney. Someone comes in and acts like an attorney or says they're an attorney. We're wondering what's the kind of deal. We're watching them and taking care of it. So both sides, the Holmes Petrasch side, are going to watch everything that's moving around them. And it's kind of interesting to me because of how much is known and what happens and the particulars. And we don't usually discuss it. It's not the campfire type discussion. It's all those inner workings. They're just quietly passed around. And it's not, there's nobody in charge. There's nobody who's number one or number two where it's passed down or a torch or anything. It's just, once you're there, you just realize how much information's flowing around of who's who. And all week it's passing along as people asking, who's this? Who's that? Do you know who that was? Hey, here's a picture. Does anybody know who this is? And it just circulates from person to person to different groups as they all work it through. So someone might call me, but I also know in the back of my head there's been 4, 5, 6 phone calls. I also know I do the same, as there'll be times that I'm like, okay, hey, do you know about this story? Someone brought this up and here's a couple names. Did you know either one of these guys or anyone associated with them? And then we build off of that. The depth of what we can build off of is pretty incredible and amazing, which is one of the problems with a few people out there who have not been entirely honest about their life history, and they would think to some degree that they still kind of are like hidden in plain sight, but a lot of it is allow them to hide in plain sight as long as we want. And you're pretty much just so well known, and it's just as people come in and someone asks, someone will decide, are you cool? Okay. Well, here's what this person's about. Here's what that person's about. A lot of Dutch hunters will be straight up forward about where they came from, a lot of things about themselves. There'll be others that will lie. And the ones that lie, you will find when you're around other people, they will basically give you the heads up and tip you off. Dutch hunters will do that, not to trick you, but just basically say, if you're going to talk about this, and I did it to a couple people about a couple subject matters, just saying, okay, you're going to hit a wall here because of this, and this is this, and I know this for a fact, and explain it to them, and just say, I don't want you to waste your time. You know, if you're really working on something really good, I don't want you to waste your time on something that's not authentic and all that. But if you have questions about it, any other questions about it, I can answer them. And one such person asked me about a particular item, and I knew where it came from, why it had come from, it, how it all evolved, where it was currently, and so forth. And I let them know it wasn't an authentic piece. It was someone who tried to put it in the place of something they said was authentic. And I told them, I'm sorry, you know, but just that's the way it is. You can go, but keep that in the back of your head. If you want to continue to explore the idea, just keep that in the back of your head that it's pretty well known that that isn't what the person says it is. And he was like, oh, okay, well, thanks a lot. And I hope I encourage it, but that's part of that. So getting back again, it's like the Holmes, the Thomas Jones, there's still a little bit of that. Like, we want to one-up you. We want to have this. You know, it's just there's so much documentation, and there is actually fraudulent documentation out there, which is sad, very sad. And it continues to sometimes find its way into places. It's upsetting because it works against the grain of what we're trying to do. The grain we want is historic truth, because historic truth will help us find the real thing, the real truth. Both groups kind of believe in a pit and believe in the arroyo and believe in certain things. They kind of look at different areas of the mountains in general, but they kind of follow certain stories. And like I said, the Holmes one is trying to discredit the one side. The other side just doesn't want anything to do with the other side. And I have plenty of friends on both sides. And I don't really care. I don't mind discussing the things as long as they're open-minded enough that when they bring up something that I feel documented as like, that's not really true, they're going to have a serious good discussion with me. I don't want arguments. That's one of my problems I usually have with the guys with the stone maps and certain other material, is they just want to get into, eventually it just derives into name calling and other problems on their side, and I'm sitting there going like, it's not that I don't believe you, I just know you're working with material that's not real, and you can't get that over to them. Is show me something else that proves this. And obviously the one thing we will always say is when you walk into the camp holding that real gold, not the painted fake stuff that some guys do that, but when you walk in with the real thing, and we could take the XRFs and test this stuff and look at it and know it came out of the mountains, because remember, even if you got the money and you buy it, we can still tell if it came out. So that's it. So you have your different groups. And I always want people to understand you don't have to take a side. Eventually you find your way to wherever. You're eventually going to feel very strongly about the Dick Holmes story or some information, what you buy into, or the Thomas Petrasch. It might be Julia Thomas. It might be more Rhinehart and the Petrasch family type thing. You may find and if you're a Jim Bart guy, you're kind of in that area anyways. You will find yourself in generally one of these two lanes. If you're in the stone map lane, you're in your own little kind of like roundabout. You know how you got one road that goes somewhere, but there's two different ways to get into town? The stone map guys are another weird loop that goes a different direction. And it's not, I got plenty of guys that are stone map guys. Rick Gwynn was a stone map guy to the day he died. And I loved Rick, and I loved talking about him, and he would chew my ear off about stone map stuff and all. And I didn't mind hearing it. He was my friend, and he believed in what he believed in. And we talked about things, and I told him my side and what I knew. And Rick was kind of, and it was like he absorbed it and then went right back into it. And it doesn't matter. I would have dug for Rick any day of the week. And I went out there and always supported him on his endeavors. So if you're a good guy and you got something and you're really cool about it and stuff, and you're open about it, because Rick didn't hide anything. So you kind of knew what he was about and where he was about and stuff. If you're trying to hide stuff from everybody and trying to think, everybody eventually is going to just think one of two things. Don't bother, or you're a nutcase. And usually everybody's pretty open. If you're looking for something to get something done, just be open and be friendly about it and be good about it. And if someone doesn't believe it, just move on. Don't try Frank first, though, because Frank's usually the negative Nelly of the group. And people bother him too much. They bother him way too much. I don't mind it as much, but yeah, you got to watch. There's a threshold. I understand with Tom Collenborn, Ron Feldman, and Bob Shoes. Try not to, okay? But be cool with these guys. But whatever you believe in, whatever your endeavors in, we've talked about this in those groups and everything. Thank you for coming to the rendezvous. Thank you for making everything great. All right? So we will be seeing you guys this Friday. I don't know what's coming up because we have nothing really planned. But it's the time to get in the mountains, so we're going to be working on other stuff in the mountains, which I know everybody wants to see, the live episodes and the regular episodes, which will be coming back. So we're all doing that stuff. But until then, until this Friday, till the next Monday, and the next time you see us, maybe even on the trails, always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle, you're not, and this was Chasing Legends.